Hey everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. Today we're diving into one of the most complicated and emotional stories in the world. The Israel-Hamas conflict, the so-called Trump peace plan, and why, once again, a ceasefire that looked historic collapsed almost overnight. People keep asking the same question: why can't there be peace? And maybe the better question is, why does peace never last? Let's break this down. What happened, why it happened, and what it really says about power, politics, and the illusion of control in the modern Middle East. When Israel and Hamas agreed to a ceasefire, just days after the Trump administration proudly announced a 20-point peace plan, the world sighed with relief. Finally, a break from the violence. Finally, a chance to rebuild. But barely a week later, it all fell apart. Israel launched dozens of airstrikes across Gaza, saying Hamas fighters had killed 2 Israeli soldiers. Hamas denied involvement, but it didn't matter. Gaza was bombed, more than 40 Palestinians were reported dead, and the fragile truce vanished like smoke. If that sounds familiar, that's because it is. Every few years, there's a ceasefire, then an escalation, then another ceasefire. It's a cycle so predictable that most people in the region have stopped believing the word peace means anything real. So what went wrong? Again, according to Washington-based analyst Giorgio Cafiero, the ceasefire was never meant to be permanent. It was a tactical pause, a way to get Israeli hostages released and give both sides a short-term political win. He's not wrong. Even before the deal was signed, Israeli far-right minister Itamar Ben-Gvir publicly declared that Israel would resume its war on Gaza the moment all living hostages were home. That's not a peace plan. That's an intermission. And the U.S., while trying to look like the hero, knew exactly what kind of deal it was brokering. It wasn't peace, it was project management. Here's where things get complicated. For decades, America has been Israel's biggest backer, militarily, financially, and politically. Every U.S. president, from Truman to Biden, has repeated the same line: Israel has a right to defend itself. That phrase used to mean moral support. Now it's practically a blank check. Analysts like Cafiero believe Trump still has the leverage to restrain Israel, but that assumes Trump wants to use that leverage. And here's the thing. Trump's foreign policy has never been about long-term architecture. It's about quick wins, big headlines, and television moments. If a peace deal makes him look like the world's greatest negotiator, he'll push for it. If it risks alienating his base or angering Israel's government, he'll pull back in a second. That's why Trump's 20-point plan feels less like a roadmap and more like a press release. To understand why this conflict keeps reigniting, you have to look inside Israel itself. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's longest-serving leader, is fighting for his political life. He's under indictment for corruption and faces weekly protests across the country. His survival depends on far-right and ultra-Orthodox parties that reject any talk of a Palestinian state. In that kind of coalition, compromise isn't just unpopular, it's political suicide. Every time Netanyahu shows restraint, he risks being branded a traitor. Every time the rockets fly, he gets to rally the nation around security. It's cynical, but it works. That's why even some Israelis quietly admit this endless conflict, tragic as it is, helps their leaders stay in power. It keeps society focused on external threats instead of domestic ones. Things like inequality, corruption, or the growing secular versus religious divide. In other words, war has become political oxygen. Now flip the lens to the other side, Hamas. If Israel's politics run on fear, Hamas's run on survival. Born out of the First Intifada, Hamas knows it can't defeat Israel militarily. Its real goal isn't victory, it's relevance. Every time Israel bombs Gaza, Hamas gains legitimacy in the eyes of some Palestinians as the last force still resisting occupation. It's a grim feedback loop. Israeli strikes kill civilians, Hamas gains sympathy, Hamas rearms, Israel retaliates again. Inside Gaza, Hamas controls everything: schools, hospitals, charities, propaganda. Its leaders live underground while civilians above suffer under blockade. And even within Hamas, there's division. Pragmatists who want limited peace deals and hardliners who reject Israel's existence outright. Trump's peace plan tried to exploit that divide, offering reconstruction money in exchange for gradual disarmament. But no Hamas leader can publicly agree to disarm under siege without being labeled a traitor. So they play a familiar double game: talk peace in public, prepare for war in private. Here's the real reason peace collapses. The two sides want completely different things. For Israel, the goal is to eliminate Hamas. For Hamas, the goal is simply to survive. Israel says, disarm first, then we'll talk. Hamas says, end the blockade first, then we'll talk. Both positions make sense to their followers, and both are impossible to reconcile. That's why every ceasefire is built on deliberate ambiguity. It's the only way to get signatures on paper. But that same vagueness guarantees the deal will fall apart later. No deal in the Middle East happens in isolation. Countries like Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey all had a hand in brokering the Trump-backed truce. Each had its own motives. Egypt wants stability at its border. Qatar wants to look like a peace broker. Turkey wants to posture as a defender of Muslim causes while balancing Western ties. They all helped Hamas come to the table, but none of them can enforce anything. In the end, enforcement always falls on Washington, and that's the problem. America no longer has the leverage it once did. There was a time when a phone call from the White House could stop Israeli operations overnight. Those days are over. Israel now understands American politics inside out. It knows both Republicans and Democrats are terrified of appearing anti-Israel. That bipartisan shield gives Netanyahu enormous room to maneuver. Meanwhile, America's reputation as a peacemaker has collapsed across the Middle East, partly because of the Iraq War, partly because of the chaotic Afghanistan withdrawal, and partly because Americans themselves have lost interest. Let's be honest, most voters care more about gas prices and student loans than Gaza. So when analysts say all eyes are on Washington, they're only half right. The rest of the world stopped watching years ago. There's also a whole new battlefield that older generations of diplomats barely understand: social media. Every missile strike is a viral clip. Every tragedy becomes global outrage. Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube have turned this war into a moral referendum for millions of people who've never been to Israel or Gaza. That changes everything. Now politicians aren't just talking to their voters. They're performing for global audiences. And that makes compromise even harder. Restraint looks like weakness. Defiance goes viral. Trump's team, of course, understands media better than anyone. They know how to spin the narrative fast, but perception without substance, that burns hot and fades fast. Let's talk about the man at the center of all this: Donald Trump. Trump's peace plan is divided into phases: humanitarian aid, prisoner swaps, reconstruction, and eventually, political negotiations. On paper, it's pragmatic. In reality, it's déjà vu. We've seen this before: Oslo, Camp David, the Abraham Accords. Every plan collapses on the same issues: borders, sovereignty, Jerusalem, and who gets to control Gaza. Trump's advantage is that he doesn't follow the traditional diplomatic playbook. He's bold, unpredictable, and sometimes that unpredictability creates leverage. But you can't build peace on spectacle. You need patience, and patience doesn't trend on social media. Both Netanyahu and Hamas leaders are fighting for survival, not peace. For Netanyahu, peace means compromise, which means losing his far-right coalition. For Hamas, peace means disarmament, which means losing relevance and control. And for Washington, the conflict itself maintains relevance. It keeps America in the conversation, even as its power declines. Everyone, in a twisted way, benefits from the status quo, except the civilians buried beneath the rubble. To be fair, Trump's foreign policy instincts aren't entirely wrong. He saw that traditional U.S. diplomacy was exhausted and that regional players were acting independently. Unlike previous presidents, he didn't pretend to be a moral referee. He treated international politics like a business negotiation. High stakes, fast results. That's how he got the Abraham Accords, a genuine diplomatic success. But he also reinforced the perception that America no longer cares about long-term peace, only leverage. Trump's unpredictability does make both allies and enemies pay attention. But without a consistent vision behind it, unpredictability turns into chaos. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Every U.S. president since Carter has tried to be the one who finally solves the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And every one of them has failed. Why? Because this isn't a conflict you can negotiate like a trade deal. It's about trauma, identity, faith, and history. You can sign treaties, shake hands, take pictures, but unless both sides redefine what victory means, it's only a matter of time before it collapses again. This latest breakdown doesn't just affect Israel and Gaza. It ripples across the region. Iran keeps arming proxy groups. Hezbollah watches closely from Lebanon, ready to exploit chaos. Saudi Arabia, once moving toward normalization with Israel, is now hesitating again, wary of angering the Arab public. Every missile in Gaza shakes the foundations of Middle Eastern politics, and the longer it drags on, the weaker America's narrative of stability through strength becomes. So where does that leave us? Right back where we started. Only worse. The Trump administration may push for phase 2 of its plan, but the same contradictions remain. Israel wants total security, Hamas wants survival, Washington wants a headline. Until those fundamental incentives change, no document will matter. For people living in Gaza, all this geopolitical talk means nothing. What matters is survival. Families are trapped in a cycle of destruction and rebuilding, trauma and repetition. In Israel, parents send their kids to the army, knowing the next war is always just a few years away. Security for Israel and freedom for Palestinians sound like two sides of the same impossible dream, both right, both unattainable. And that's the tragedy. Every time Washington steps into this conflict, it claims to bring stability. But the truth is, America doesn't control the outcome anymore. It just manages the tempo. Israel fights when it wants to. Hamas resists when it can. And Washington choreographs the chaos just long enough to declare progress. That's not diplomacy. That's damage control. If there's ever going to be real peace, it will require something neither side has shown: courage. Not courage on the battlefield. Courage at the negotiating table. The courage to tell your own people uncomfortable truths. The courage to lose an election for the sake of ending a war. That kind of leadership is rare everywhere, not just in the Middle East. So, can Trump actually bring peace to Gaza? In theory, yes, if he's willing to push both sides harder than any American president ever has. In reality, probably not, because the incentives for war are still stronger than the incentives for peace. The Trump plan buys time, not peace. It delivers headlines, not healing. But even a temporary ceasefire saves lives, and in this region, sometimes that's the most you can hope for. Still, the truth remains. No press conference in Washington or handshake in Tel Aviv can end this conflict. It'll only end when both peoples, Israelis and Palestinians, decide that endless war costs more than imperfect peace. So, what do you think? Can Trump's peace plan really end the Gaza war? Or is it just another illusion? Is America still capable of leading, or has the world simply moved on? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe understanding matters more than taking sides, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video. Because in times like these, informed voices matter more than ever. Thanks for watching. I'm Steve, and I'll see you next time.